Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel, and today we are going to learn how to create a solid rectangle in C++. Here is a pattern. You see, here is a pattern, the solid rectangle, and in this pattern the number of rows and columns are different. The number of rows is 3 and number of columns is 5, and let's understand by nested loops for this pattern. For understanding this pattern, and in this video, in this pattern printing problem, we, we will make two variables, first rows and columns, and we will see the full code on the Visual Studio Code. Okay, and let's begin to start how to create this pattern. And for int I is equal to 0, I less than rows, and I plus plus. Here the this loop the, this loop controls the number of rows, and this inner loop controls the number of columns, prints the star. And here I plus plus is increment operator, and j plus plus also a increment operator. And let's begin to input by user from number of rows and number of columns they want. And here the number of we consider the same pattern, here the same pattern. And let's consider the number of rows. The number of rows is 3 and number of column is 5. Okay, and here I is equal to 0, I equal to 0 in the first iteration, and 0 less than 3 is true because the number of rows is 3 and number of columns is 5 here. Okay, and in the first iteration I equals to 0 and I less than 3 is true, and it enters in the compiler enters in the inner loop. And 0 j equal to 0 in the first iteration, j equal to 0 in the first iteration. And here 0 is less than 5, this is true, and the compiler enters in the loop and run this line, and we have a star in the first row. And after this, by the help of this increment operator, j becomes 1, j becomes 1, and it again the condition is true, and it's enter the compiler enters in the loop, and we have one more stars. And as the same, j becomes 2, j becomes 3, and j becomes 4. And as the same, we have 5 stars in the first row, 5 stars in the first row. And after this j becomes 5, and this condition, 5 less than 5, 5 less than 5 is false, and the compiler came out from the loop and run this line cout earlier, and we have a next line here. And after this the I becomes 1, this condition is also true, and the compiler enters in the loop. Same process runs again, and we have 5 more stars in the second row, 4 and 5 stars in the second row. And after this iteration, and I becomes 2, and 2 less than 3, this is also true, and it enters in the loop, and we have 5 stars in the third row, 1 2 3 4 and 5. We have 5 stars in the third row. And after this the I becomes 3, and the compiler come out from the this nested loops, and we have our pattern. Here you see that this pattern and this is same. In the both patterns there are 3 rows and 5 stars in each rows. Okay, and let's code our this pattern on the Visual Studio Code. Okay, and let's go on the Visual Studio Code. So I opened my VS Code and create a file solid rectangle triangle dot cpp, and here we start our code. C++ boilerplate include using namespace std then semicolon, and create a main function int main function in curly braces, and create two variables. First int column, sorry, first we create int rows. The spelling mistake, here is a spelling mistake, rows, sorry, and create second variable. And before the create second variable, we input our rows from the user, enter number of rows, and input it from user cin rows semicolon, and enter, and create next variable int rows, sorry, int columns, and at the same, and input it from the user, enter number of columns, and cin columns, and create our nested loops. After this, create our nested loops for int I equal to 0 and I less than rows and I plus plus, and create inner loop for it controls the number of columns. So j is equal to 0 and j less than columns and j plus plus, and print our stars cout star with a space, and give a next line after this inner loop, and cout, sorry, here is an error because we are not initialize this variable data type int j is equal to 0, and create next line cout endl, and let's run our code. Here is a run button and run code, and here we see that we have the compiler asking you enter number of rows. We have 3 rows according to our question, and number of columns 5 columns according to our question, and here we see that the 3 rows and 5 columns, and each row have 5 stars. Okay, if you found this helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe for more pattern printing tutorials. Thanks for watching.